welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. We have a spooky today. She says, hello. Goodbye. So today I'm really excited and nervous for my project that we're doing this week. I am starting to dig into my fabric I have been too afraid to sew with, but now I feel like I'm a good enough seamstress I can start to dig in. So today we're going to work with this beautiful fabric. Let me open it up. This is some really beautiful printed silk that I picked up in Rome last year. This was, I think, 58 euros a yard. I'll look up what that is in American dollars for the total. But this is so far the most expensive fabric I've ever cut into. I'm super nervous, but I feel confident in my ability to do so. It's not going to be the funnest fabric. It's not quite as slick as a charmeuse, which I have worked with a silk charmeuse before, so there's at least that, but it is still pretty slippery. I do feel confident in my ability to work with this. However, it will definitely be scary to cut into this because it's so expensive. I think I'm going to seam bind these seams instead of French seam them because I'm afraid of the math for that, but we'll decide when the cutting goes down. What are we doing, kid? Let's talk pattern. I have a Lady Marlowe pattern here. I'm using, I would need to look up the year actually, but I think it's late 30s, early 40s. It's not bias cut actually, which I'm okay with. I thought this was a bias cut dress just because of the era and the shape, but it's not. I've actually, I guess, like, spoiler, I've been working on a mock-up. It's not quite finished, but I wasn't going to do the mock-up on camera because I will walk you through working with the fabric in detail. But I did want to obviously do a mock-up when using fabric this expensive. It will be a wearable mock-up. I just basically have to finish up the sleeves and put the waist and the skirt together, do the closure and hem it, and then I will be done with my wearable mock-up, and I'll walk you through any of the fit adjustments I want to make. I'll try it on for you guys, but yeah, I didn't feel like it was necessarily worth doing on camera for you since I am going to do this complete project in detail on camera. I believe this pattern only comes in a 34-inch bust, but I will double check that and I will link it down below regardless. I have used, I think, one of her patterns before and I've been pretty impressed with these. I actually think I'll probably pick her patterns more frequently because I do feel like they're a good deal for the specialty styles that they are, and I do like having like stuff from that early that is not as frightening or delicate or anything to work with from being old. I'm pretty pumped and I'm very ready to do this, but I am going to be very nervous to cut into this fabric, but we'll all be okay. I'm gonna, I think, learn to use my walking foot to make sure this goes as smoothly as possible. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into the cutting out of this fabric. All right, I'm gonna real quick talk fit of this dress. Overall, the fit is looking pretty okay. And the front looks really great. My biggest concern is the back. So where the zipper is, there's supposed to be like a pleat that goes over about another, say, 1/4 inch. And I can't do that. It's a little bit too small in the waist, so I think I'm gonna add a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch to the back, and hopefully that'll help keep everything balanced enough. The other thing that I'm not gonna really show you is the hem. I'm having a hard time getting my hem too short or too long, so I'm gonna cut that as is and figure it out at the end of the dress. But this mock-up turned out pretty well, except for having the zipper exposed. I'm not gonna put a zipper in the final. The dress actually has you put it in with like hook and eye. I just didn't feel like doing it for a wearable mock-up because I'm not, I don't know, that's just not the vibe. The other thing is I think the sleeves kind of are too movie, and so I'm gonna move the sleeve up by like a 1/2 inch this way so it actually sits on my shoulder the way it should. I think my shoulders just aren't as broad, so they don't hold the sleeves as well as they should. So those are the things I'm planning on changing, and now we can actually hop into the cutting of the beautiful silk. All right, I am starting out by laying out all my pieces and then cutting them out. I was actually pretty surprised. I had more than enough fabric. There wasn't like a huge fabric lack of space issue. Definitely though, these pattern pieces are big, especially the skirt pattern pieces. I did try to use my rotary cutter here where possible, just because silk is so shifty and it's just easier, I feel like, to like clamp it down. As you can see, I chose to wear my mock-up during this process, so I guess you can get a more complete picture of it. I think this is kind of a funny choice that I made, but whatever. And I am cutting these. Some of the different distances you're seeing is either me adding extra room on the skirts, so that way way it fits me just a little bit better. And then I'm also leaving an extra 1/2 inch for a French seam. Continuing those patterns with the bodice and cutting out all those pieces. The bodice pieces are all really interesting looking because they rely so much on all the pleats and tucks and things. And then I had a viewer actually recently ask me why I put the right sides inside, and it's because I like to do my marking on the wrong side, so that way they aren't super visible on the right side, and a lot of times you're working from the wrong side anyway. So that is what I am doing here. Spooky is watching, as always. And while we enjoy some footage of me cutting and marking, this is your reminder that I have a Ko-Fi where you can send me a little tip or buy me a coffee. I always really appreciate it. It takes so much time and love and money to run this channel, so anything always really helps keep my channel going. We will continue cutting. So my goal for today is to get the bodice done. So first I am starting by making pencil lines where these darts on the front are, before then pinning them. These aren't like the usual straight darts that you work with on other patterns. They're slightly more curvy, so that is why I'm not using a ruler and I'm kind of just eyeballing it. I feel like I have enough experience in drawing that I feel comfortable eyeballing it. And then once those are marked, I'm of course pinning them and prepping them to go on the sewing machine. And now I am sewing my darts. I feel like they're kind of more tucks because they're still pretty wide by the end, so I'm actually able to backstitch both ways, which is nice, because then I don't have to do the weird knotting thing. I actually really like open-ended darts / tucks just because I think they like ease into the volume of the bust really nicely, so I'm always a huge fan of this type. I do want to note while making these darts that I tried to use my walking foot. Everyone has sung praises about their walking foot, and I don't know if it just I was using it wrong or this wasn't the right fabric, but I found that it like left more room for my fabric to shift and pleat and do weird things, and I actually had to unpick some of these, which was really frustrating. The walking foot was not working for me, so I went ahead and I went back to my normal foot and it worked significantly better for me. So if you have any tips on why my darts look the way they do, let me know. Because yeah, this walking foot was not the magic trick I thought it was going to be. And trust me, I really tried. I messed with tension. I did all the things and nothing made my walking foot work well for me. And then after pressing these, I am pinning the front together where I'm going to sew. It's only a little bit. It looks like a longer line than it is, but it does stop at the blue point that's marked. It is also at this step that I am double turn hemming the parts of the sleeves that are indicated for me to do so. I'm doing this with as narrow of a hem as possible. The next step for me on these is working with the pleat. That is just the pleat in both sides of like the top of the sleeve arm things. And after I pin those, I'm going to go ahead and baste them. And then it was time to pin it to the straps. Something was off and I must have cut this like not quite right, because they definitely like stretched out a bunch and I kind of had to trim them and re-narrow hem the areas that I trimmed. This is obviously not ideal, but there was too much of a difference and I had to figure out how to do something about it. So trimming was my best option before then being ready to sew on the sleeve to the back shoulder strap. The back shoulder strap consists of the sleeve and the shoulder strap are both facing the same way on like right sides out, and then I put those with a bias tape, which is going to be basically the like finished edge of this, or like the facing, because a pattern like this doesn't really do facings. And then I am sewing that. In lieu of my walking foot, which wasn't quite working, I just made sure to hold my fabric really tense between the front and the back, which is what you kind of see me here. And then right now also what I'm going to do is after I stitch the bias tape down, I'm then going to understitch so everything will lay and press really flat and really nice. Most vintage patterns do not tell you to understitch your facings, but you should definitely do it if the seam is like understitchable. Essentially, it will give you so much of a more clean and professional feel. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn that over, and the bias tape I cut at 1.5 inches, so that way I can turn the bias tape around the seam and then turn it again, and so then we have a clean finished folded edge where the hand stitching will eventually happen. I feel like because of the like slipperiness of the silk, it's so hard to tell what I'm doing at certain steps, but here what I'm doing is I am pinning the tops of the shoulders of the sleeves where they're supposed to go, as well as that back strap that goes into the bodice, so that way everything is ready to sew. And then after I sew these down, I am sewing around the armhole with a bias tape again. This is the same exact width of bias tape that I used for the shoulder strap. It's just here now in the armhole. This was slightly challenging because I had to avoid, like, there's just some trickiness with like the pleating and the sleeves to making sure I'm not avoiding or like sewing through any layers I shouldn't be. And then again, I'm going to go back over this and I'm going to understitch so that way everything again will fold in and press nice and flat. And then the other thing I've done here is I have sewn down the back strap, and here I'm just turning it out. I just did this with my hands because the satin silk is really slippery, so it was not too bad to turn myself. Also, it's a very narrow piece. And then after getting that turned out, I'm going to pin it in place with where it goes. This is like the strap that basically keeps the back together up at the top. Because of the open back, it needs to have an anchor at both the top and the bottom. So this is the top anchor. And then I'm going to be settling in for an evening of hand stitching. It's quite beautiful out. The sun is shining into my apartment, and it is so nice to be able to sit on the couch and just enjoy the sun coming in. Here I am doing the facings. Actually, that's just primarily what I'm doing. All those bias facings that I made, I am now just stitching down, so that way all my frayed and raw edges are not visible. I'm just using, I think it's like the slip stitch or cat stitch or whatever, where you only do one of the front threads, but then you go through the facing. And this worked pretty darn well. And with that, I'm going to check in with you tomorrow before I start my second day of sewing. Oh boy, we're looking really crooked here. Hold. All right, that is better. Still not framed exactly the way I want, but whatever. Good morning. It is 2 days after I started my dress. I had taken a Friday off, so I had a 3-day weekend. Yesterday, I went out to my friend's farm, and then I went out to a couple of gay bars last night. So today, I am starting, it's about 10:15. Today, my goal is basically to get the skirt done, attach it to the dress, get everything all wrapped up, and film the reveal. So that is sort of the plan, I guess. We'll see if I can accomplish all those things today. The skirt should not take that long. It's pretty straightforward, but it does have a lot of like pleating detail that I'll have to figure out. But I do have the bodice done. I feel like this dress doesn't like have good hanger appeal, I guess is what you could call that. This is how it's looking. It's shaping up as it should. Definitely learned a lot on the first go round. So I got the sleeves the way they are back in here put on better. I think everything overall is gonna flow better. And I also moved the front of the sleeves up a little bit because my shoulders are so slight that I just need it moved up a little bit so it stays. But it's looking really beautiful. I adore this fabric. Right now, one of my debates is when I hemmed this, it kind of bubbled. So I'm gonna press it and see if I can like press out any of this bubbling, but if not, I might not have this tacked down. We'll see. For this skirt, we're doing all French seams, so that'll be an adventure. I think I cut one small piece wrong, which is the pleated back piece, so it's really small, so I can recut it no problem if I need to, and I might need to go ahead and do that. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and hop into sewing. I'm pretty excited. Generally, my plan today is to work until about noon. I am craving McDonald's, so I'm gonna head out to McDonald's and grab that for lunch, even though I meal prepped. I just kind of feel like a little bit of junk today. Didn't even drink that much last night to be feeling like eating junk food today, but sometimes you get a craving and you can't stop it. So I'll break for that, and then I do have dinner meal prepped as well, so I'll break for that if I need to. I don't think I have any more than like 4 hours of sewing left, but we'll see how true that hypothesis is. So yeah, we're gonna jump into the sewing. Here I'm starting with the back middle panel. So there's like 2 middle panels and then 2 side panels in the back, and the middle panels that you have to start with first because you are doing some pleating that you need to do while they're solo and on their own. So first I am starting by pinning these wrong sides together because I'm doing a French hem. And then after sewing up that seam, I am trimming it down before then ironing it and pressing it so that way it can go inside out. And then I am back to right sides together, and we're gonna have a nice clean seam there. And then after that, my next job is to pleat it. So I'm just putting in pins so I can see my mark on the right side, so that way I can then press that down and have my pleat all ready to go. And then I am going ahead and pinning that right where it goes, which is right down the middle seam, forming a box pleat. I've already pleated the other side off camera. And here I'm actually stitching that down. I sometimes stitch from top to bottom, sometimes bottom to top. There is not really a huge rhyme or reason, but it does always take me a little bit to position, especially with silk. Silk is so slick. Here I started pleating this piece of satin that goes over the back to give it a nice cute pleated look. In theory, I think you could skip this and it wouldn't change the look of the dress that much, and I will say I futzed around with trying to make this work for probably almost 2 hours between trying to pleat it and then trying to place it on the bodice. But here I'm trying to pleat it, and in the middle of pleating it I realized I need to have a finished seam, so I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my machine to do that. And then from having learned from my mock-up, I knew that I wanted to get this to have a finished seam on the like pleated bit, because otherwise there's just kind of a raw seam sitting around. So here I am stitching that seam binding on. And now we're going to go into super speed mode. Here I am trying to pleat this. It starts to go off on a diagonal. It's a whole big journey. I took so long trying to figure out how to get the pleats in this to work. At the end of the day, they did kind of go diagonally, but because I was using French seams, that was okay. So I just kind of lived with it. It does mean it will twist weird if it's pulled a certain way, but I ultimately think it's not too noticeable. But this was definitely a challenge, which is so funny because this was so easy when I did my mock-up, and so it's purely the slickness of the fabric that made this so challenging. The mock-up was so easy and fast, and I think it's just because it wasn't slippery. After I have pleats I can live with, I'm going ahead and basting it down. The instructions doesn't tell you to do this, but I know how sad I'd be if I didn't sew, and how easy it is to pull out these stitches when I need to. So I am basting these. I actually did a double row of bastes because I wasn't sure exactly what would be helpful for when I eventually sew them together. And like I said, these are pretty easy stitches to take out, and usually you don't want to pierce silk more than you have to, but I feel like this pattern's loud enough that I can get away with it. And here is where I found out I screwed up with my mock-up actually. So you're gonna see me futzing for again a while. This was part of like the 2-hour process that just figuring out this panel took. Because I did such a poor job pleating, the notches weren't aligning. So I was just trying to figure out the placement to not screw up the rest of this pattern. I did eventually get it all figured out and it worked out okay, but here's me just like messing with it. This is like a reminder that I'm a human, I guess, that like I mess up a bunch, and it does take me sometimes some time to work through things. I feel like a lot of times my projects go pretty smoothly, but this project definitely didn't, and I always want to be sure to really talk through when something's not going smoothly. This part was not smooth at all, but I did get it to work at the end of the day. And with the pleats finally figured out and stitched down, I am now going ahead and putting the side backs onto the back. Again, I am doing this using a French seam technique, so first sewing it and then taking the time to press it and really do all the work to make it nice. The silk is so high end, I want to make sure my finished product is as perfect as possible. Next up, you can see I have the pleating in place, and everything is working out mathematically as it should. I am now just pinning down the pleats. The biggest challenge here is this is going to be where my opening is. So one side I'm having to baste to be able to reopen it because the opening seam is under the pleat. So basically I am going to sew those edges down in like a narrow hem, and then I will put hooks and eyes along this pleat to hopefully keep everything like down and looking correct. This was not a very easy seam opening. Honestly, the way this dress is, there's not really a better option unless you were to skip the pleating entirely and just do a back zip. It was complicated. I do think if I make this dress again, I might adapt it like that, which if I do, I'll be sure to at least put a short or something on YouTube. And with that, I am again ready to stitch up the side seams, again doing a French seam. Now I'm ready to attach the bodice to the skirt. So what I'm first doing is I am folding over and pressing the edge, the seam allowance amount, and then I'm going to start matching up all my notches. All my math worked out, everything's lining up, things are feeling really, really great, and I'm pretty excited. And I definitely learned a ton from my first round because I learned that I want the sleeves, like the back of the sleeves, up about 1/4 of an inch, so that way when I sew it down, it looks neat. I just definitely feel like the mock-up was super worth it. I always do think a mock-up is super worth it. I just don't always put in the time, but if I'm working with something this expensive, I am definitely putting in that time. I also finally figured out that by using my sewing ham, I can actually put in the pins from the front instead of having to always go from the back. So that was really nice because otherwise I was pinning it in the back and then turning it to the front and repinning it in the front and taking the back pins out so then I can have it sewn correctly, because I definitely wanted to be top stitching and seeing the top part while sewing. And then here I am marking where all the hook and eyes are gonna go. I definitely, when I started sewing, used to kind of like eyeball stuff, but I've learned it's just better to mark it on a flat surface using a ruler. And so that is what I am going to be doing here. And again, it's that pleat. So the hooks will be under the pleat and then the eyes will be attached to the back of the dress. Like I said, I'm thinking about how to do this better. I'm almost curious if in the future it would be better to do it down the back seam, have the zipper there, have the pleat be like snapped in the back, because then you're not putting as much pressure on your back closure as this does. But that's just future thoughts and almost a note to myself if I make this pattern again. And now I am hand sewing these hooks and eyes in. This was really tedious because there were 7 and that's a lot of hand sewing, but I did get it done. I put on a good show. I got through it. And then I finally tried it on, and wow, the hem stretched quite a bit. I should have rechecked all my pieces before sewing them together, but I didn't, and now I'm paying that price. So first I start by taking 3 inches off the parts that stretched the most. That kind of worked, but also the dress was still very, very, very lopsided even after I did that. So off camera, I had then tried to eyeball it using a tape measure, but because the bodice like curves up, it was really hard to get like an even measure. So I continued to botch it, and so I had to phone in a friend who came over and kind of like haircut it to fairly even hem. When you watch on the reveal, I think if you watch closely, you'll see that the hem is not perfectly even, and honestly the hem's a little higher than I wanted because of this mistake. That's okay, life happens, and it just means I'll have to have some amazing shoes to go with it. But after my friend came over and helped me, I can now finally hem this beast. I am pretty ready to be done working with this silk and go back to my smoother cotton ways, but this was definitely a good learning process. I also learned how to get a really good narrow hem with my silk. I basically learned how to use the tension in my favor, where I went around that first time to fold it up, and then when I folded it up that second time, you could really get it on that thread edge and sew around it, and it really equaled this really, really, really stunning seam. I got a little worried because as I was sewing, I noticed that the double turn narrow hem started to kind of make this like curl, but once I pressed it, it actually worked kind of nice, almost like horsehair, to keep the dress from floating like and attaching to my legs, and instead it gave it some volume around the bottom. So that was pretty exciting. But now I have made it through this sewing journey. I'm so excited to show you the reveal. So let's go ahead and hop into it. All right, you've seen the reveal. I took it at a park. You can't tell, but I'm very close to a playground and had lots of children staring at me. Seems to be a common theme for me for my reveals lately. Yeah, I don't know, children are scary, and their judgment is way scarier than adult judgment for me. But anyway, with wrapping this up, I do have my usual cost breakdown and then final thoughts on the project. I have my breakdown here on my trusty spreadsheet. This one will give you sticker shock. It was expensive. This is the most expensive fabric I've ever worked with. So my fabric cost about $200 $266. This is a lot for me. This was up, I think, 4 yards or 4.5 yards, so not that huge of a yardage. It came out to, I think, around like $62 or $63 a yard. I do not normally work with fabric this expensive. Usually I keep my fabric 25 and below, but this was an exception since I picked it up on my trip in Italy. I can link that video in the eye where I show you all the fabrics I brought back from there. It was really high quality. I'm really happy that I got this fabric, and I'm happy with the result, which we'll get into, but it was $266, which is so much money. This is not the most expensive yardage of fabric I have in my stash. I do have one that beats it out that I probably won't tackle until next year. The anxiety alone from this one makes me not want to tackle any fabric that expensive for quite a bit. Notion wise, we were pretty cheap because I just needed hooks and eyes and thread. So I used 2 rolls of threads on this and 7 hook and eyes, bringing us to a total of $3.96. The pattern was $29.78. I will link that down below. It was from Lady Marlowe. This was a fantastic pattern. I used the 34 bust. That is my bust measurement. And then for labor, actually this dress took maybe less long than expected. I did not count the mock-up in this because I did make a wearable mock-up. I'll cover the mock-up in twice a year, show you projects I made off camera, and I'll give you supply totals and all of that. Hello, my little stinkies. So that I'll give you the labor and the cost breakdown of that in one of those videos, but I just didn't feel like counting it towards this one because it's a separate wearable garment. If I made like a pure mock-up, I would count that in. Like I have done some pure mock-ups that I'm never going to wear, but I try not to do that too often. I think it's a huge waste of fabric. So if I do a mock-up, it's usually wearable. Spooky has settled into my lap, so if you hear any weird cat sounds, that's her. So this took me 13 hours and 45 minutes to complete. Honestly, yeah, not too bad. It's not that complicated of a pattern, even though it kind of is at the same time. I think a lot of it was just I had to sew really slowly with this silk. As I talked about in the process, I just had a really hard time with this silk and my machine. The walking foot made it worse, so I didn't end up using that. This was a bit challenging to work with, I'm not gonna lie. But we're gonna take that 13 hours and 45 minutes and multiply it by $32.70, which is the hourly living wage in Seattle. I count a living wage as being, I guess you could say, like lower middle class. Like I count a living wage as like you aren't stressing about money day to day, and it's not always on your mind, and you have a little bit of wiggle room. That's what I consider a living wage. So $32.70 in Seattle times 13 hours and 45 minutes is $449.63, which brings us to a grand total of $749.36. Honestly, considering the fact this is a designer, like a high-end designer silk, this is an Elie Saab silk that I picked up in Rome. I think that's actually really reasonable because I would consider this, because of the materials, I would consider this a designer dress, and designer dresses often go up into the thousands and thousands of dollars. So I actually think $749 is like a bargain on this. That's like wild to say because I would never spend that on a piece of clothing, but I do think it's reasonable considering everything about this dress. But with that, we're gonna hop into talking about the dress itself. Spooky, you being on my lap is very inconvenient for this. She's probably gonna leave me. Yeah, you're a pest. Say hello. You're gonna be here, so you need to at least say hello to everybody. But anyway, this is the dress. I have now worn it. I did wear it to work, which felt kind of wild because it's so nice and not what I would usually wear to work. To make it work appropriate, I did wear a slip under it so it wasn't so deep V'd and it wasn't so backless. That would be truly wild to wear to work. So I wore this to work. I got lots of compliments on it. But aside from that, I got a good idea. It is still a little bit too tight in the waist, which you can see by the whiskering and the fabric that is now there. I would say I would not normally wear this for like an 8-hour day. I normally probably would keep this more for like special occasions, but not too special. I have come to a point in my life where I don't want to save things for only special occasions, but I would say like I probably would try not to wear this for more than like 4 hours at a time. It's pretty comfy. It's also precious, and it's that balance of, I think too many times we keep clothing for special occasions and we don't wear them, and that's sad. And so I'm just trying to figure out what the balance is with this dress. Kind of while we're on the theme of like flaws around this dress, the waist is just a touch too small. I could also adjust that by letting out some of the pleats in the back, but then that's going to start to mess with some of the lines of the back. What really bothers me is my front seam is a little bit bubbly. You maybe could see it in the reveal. That's like just really nitpicky of me. In general, the stitching on this is was not as refined as I would like because my sewing machine had such a hard time with this fabric. Walking foot, whatever needle, whatever, anything I did, it had a hard time with this fabric, which it is a very, very slippery satin silk that is also densely woven, so it was hard to puncture, or like not puncture, but it was hard to find a needle that would go through it well. I tried 5, I think, before I settled on the best one, and it still wasn't that great. And so it does result in a lot of like uneven stitching, which is not my ideal. However, that's like nitpicky garment maker stuff. No one's gonna notice that when I wear the dress. The hem also could have gone better. I did want it a touch longer than it ended up. I'm so thankful for my friend who came over and helped me even it out because it was looking really chaotic and really bad before they came over and did that. The shoulder adjustment I made where I moved this up by just like a 1/4 inch was a huge win from the mock-up. I think in general there were a few wins from the mock-up because I was able to make it a little bit bigger, and I had done it before so it was a little bit less scary. I guess another nitpicky thing, the pleating on this turned out not as good as my mock-up, which is a bit of a bummer. Sorry, I'm like trying to show you. Which this silk was so hard to work with that it's not surprising that compared to like, I think it was like a poly rayon blend that I was working with for the other one, it's not hugely surprising that this was a lot harder to work with. But overall, I will just say, after all that critique, I am very happy with this dress. I have pretty much no complaints really on it. It's beautiful. It makes me feel beautiful. When I was wearing it, it was like one of our first like 75-degree days when I shot the reveal, and I forgot how nice it feels to wear just silk. This requires me to not really wear undergarments, maybe TMI. And so just wearing silk always for me feels like I'm not wearing anything, and I love that feeling. It's such a freeing feeling. And if I ever have anything like fancy that I need to go to where it's hot, this will for sure be my go-to garment. And I just feel so elegant and beautiful in this. It's a beautiful pattern. The sleeves are beautiful. I feel like it's just like, it's very like in a way Grecian feeling. Like it feels like it's slightly Grecian inspired, but still has that like kind of structure or like fun of the late 30s. I was surprised. I feel like I said at the beginning it was bias cut. That is not true, obviously, as you saw in the process. I just expected it to be net bias cut because of historically, I guess, what that looks like. I did feel like I got pretty comfortable with trying some different pleating techniques in this. Pleats are always something I am slightly frightened of. I think all of them worked here. I love this dress and I love this fabric. And I'm really happy that I waited over a year to use it because now my skills are of a caliber where I felt okay making it. The other thing I've been working on is using stuff in my stash that I find really precious. I don't know, I go to estate sales a lot, or I see what people's stashes are at their end of their life a lot, just from a variety of ways. And people often save their favorite fabrics and never use them, and I think that's really, really sad. So my mission this year has been to do a good amount of like fabrics that I am less anxious about because that is easier sewing for me if I don't care as much about the fabric, but also balancing it by using some of my dream fabrics that I've sourced that are just so beautiful and exciting. And I'm really, really proud of myself for taking this on because this, I don't know, I feel like it's hard to express like how scary it is to cut into fabric that's this expensive and this nice and that you know you'll never see again. Like there is no way for me to source this fabric. Believe me, I looked because I kind of wanted an extra like 2 yards to make something really voluminous, which I'm glad I couldn't find it because I think this silhouette with this print is perfect. I can't ever find this fabric again, and it can be really, really scary to cut into your stash when you have that combination of expensive and precious. I have been working on going through some of my vintage fabrics and sewing with them recently in a few videos, but the vintage fabrics are slightly less scary because they're usually less expensive than this. The combination of the expense and scarcity of this was really, really hard. So Rome is a very special place for me, and I'm trying to not go back except for like every 5 years or so. So it'll be a while, but I do plan on going back to this textile shop and trying a new silk. I will find the name of the textile shop I picked this up in Rome and link it down below. Their stuff is really expensive there. That's like your fair warning. This is high-end designer silks. Designer wools. There was stuff in there that was like over 100, it's not pounds there, euros a yard. Their silks all sat around between 55 euros to about 80 euros, but they had really, really gorgeous Chanel, Gucci, like everything. Silk. I don't know how they get those designer silk like cast-offs, but they had them. They were a great shop, and it was super fun to just look in there even. I think I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have my Ko-Fi if you want to send me a tip. I put a lot of time, money, and love into this channel. And then as always, you can support me the free ways by liking this video, leaving a comment down below, or subscribing and sticking around. I have a lot of really, really cool evening wear projects coming up in the next few months. I have friends getting married, I have Pride, I have a lot to get done. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you next time. Bye!